Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and I am delighted to welcome you to Radcliffe Day 2018. Radcliffe Day is always exciting and a highlight of the year, but it is especially so for me this year. I will be stepping down at the end of June to return to the History Department after 7 wonderful years as Dean of the Radcliffe Institute. Recognizing Thank you very much. Recognizing inspiring leaders with the Radcliffe Medal has been one of the very best parts of my job. Today, we honor a remarkable public servant, Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I am pleased to have such a fantastic crowd joining me to do that. There are nearly 2,000 of us here today in 2 tents, one in Radcliffe Yard, the other across the street in Greenleaf Yard, making this our largest Radcliffe Day ever. Many others are watching online, and I'd like to extend a special welcome to them. This afternoon, starting at 12:30, we will celebrate Secretary Clinton's achievements and award her the Radcliffe Medal. Former Secretary of State and 2001 Radcliffe medalist Madeleine Albright will offer a personal tribute. And Secretary Clinton will then engage in conversation with our own Maura Healey, a graduate of the Harvard Radcliffe class of 1992. And for those of you not from Massachusetts, our Attorney General. But first, it is our tradition to kick off Radcliffe Day with a panel discussion on a topic close to our honorees' head and heart. This morning's theme, in recognition of Hillary Clinton's service as U.S. Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, is America's role in the world. What has it been? What is it now? And what should it be? We titled our panel Toward a New Global Architecture to recall major policy speeches that Secretary Clinton delivered in 2009 and 2010 at the Council on Foreign Relations. In those speeches, Clinton enumerated important challenges that face the United States, including conflicts in the Middle East, violent extremism, nuclear proliferation, climate change, and disease. And she called for a new global architecture that would enable solutions to those issues through collective action on a global scale, with the United States taking a bold leadership role. These challenges demanded an architecture in which, and I quote her, states have clear incentives to cooperate and live up to their responsibilities, as well as strong disincentives to sit on the sidelines or sow discord and division, end quote. In constructing this new architecture, Clinton argued, the United States can, must, and will lead in this new century, end quote, resharpening its tools to undertake what she called a smart power approach that transcends simplistic distinctions between hard and soft power. Instead, the U.S. should implement a nimble statecraft that strategically combines goals like economic development with, in her words, good old-fashioned diplomacy. The challenges Secretary Clinton grappled with almost 10 years ago are still very much with us, and many of them feel only more urgent today. All of them require global solutions in a world that is more interconnected than ever before. As a result of our interdependence, even challenges that once seemed solidly domestic have become increasingly global in nature. Diseases don't respect national borders. We have seen this in the cases of H1N1, SARS, MERS, Zika, and the 2013 to 2016 Ebola epidemic. Climate change has been a global issue since we first started talking about it. We know that we share a single atmosphere, but global cooperation to reduce emissions continues to prove challenging. The threat posed by non-state violent extremist groups, such as ISIS, Boko Haram, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Shabaab, similarly transcends political frontiers and demands global cooperation. So too does the massive displacement of millions of people who are refugees from conflicts in Syria, South Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. In the face of these and many other new and still evolving global challenges, it is imperative to return to Secretary Clinton's question and probe the current state of the global architecture and the role the United States is playing in it, hopefully as a force for peaceful stability, for moral leadership and including women's rights, for greater worldwide prosperity, and for solving formidable world problems. In seeking solutions, moreover, we must also avoid a growing danger that Madeleine Albright recently warned about: the rising tide of authoritarianism around the world, from Russia to the Philippines to Venezuela. As Albright wrote last month, we may be encouraged that most people in most countries still want to live freely and in peace, but there is no ignoring the storm clouds that have gathered. And she continued, if one were to draft a script chronicling fascism's resurrection, the abdication of America's moral leadership would make a credible first scene, end quote. Recently, it seems that the United States is lurching from one crisis to another, whether it's the war in Syria, the nuclear standoffs with North Korea and Iran, or the US exit from international agreements like the Paris Climate Change Accord and trade alliances. The President has called for an America First foreign policy, but it bears asking what the America First means in today's world. Over a century since Woodrow Wilson used the slogan in his 1916 re-election campaign to assuage fears of US involvement in World War I, and so many decades since the America First Committee promoted its opposition to the US's entry into World War II. In today's environment of global challenges, massive international trade, population mobility, technological transfer, and high-tech threats, can the United States really go it alone? And if and when it does, what does America First convey to the rest of the world, friends and foes alike? Our panel this morning provides an exceptional opportunity to step back and begin to piece together the current state of the global architecture and the role that the United States is assuming within it. What do recent American actions and reactions add up to? Where are we headed? What kind of expertise is needed? And how should we, as individuals and as a country, think about America's role and responsibilities in this seemingly ever more precarious world? We could have no better guide to this important discussion than Nicholas Burns, who is the Roy and Barbara Goodman Family Professor of the Practice of Diplomacy and International Relations at the Harvard Kennedy School, where he also leads the Future of Diplomacy Project and the Project on Europe and the Transatlantic Relationship. Nick Burns is director of the Aspen Strategy Group, and he sits on too many boards and advisory groups to name. But before joining the Kennedy School, Burns was a member of the US Foreign Service for 27 years, including as US Ambassador to Greece, US Ambassador to NATO, and from 2005 to 2008 as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, where he led negotiations on the US-India Civil Nuclear Agreement, Iran's nuclear program, and much more. I am enormously grateful to Nick for taking on this assignment today and for all the help he has given me over the past year as we plan together for today. He will introduce our panelists and then he will engage them in discussion. So please join me in warmly welcoming Nicholas Burns.
Liz, thank you. Good morning, everybody, on this beautiful morning in Radcliffe Yard. We have a lot of people to thank for this tremendous day, but there is one woman who has led this institute, and she's walking right in front of me. She has led it with strength and dynamism and passion and an unfailing belief that reason and empirical thought and the pursuit of knowledge represent the highest values of Radcliffe Institute and of Harvard University. She has expanded Radcliffe's public programs. She has added new professorships. If you take a look around this glorious Radcliffe Yard, she's brought art and art installations into the heart of the yard, and she's embraced our President Drew Faust's vision of one Harvard, may it ever be so. I think after 7 extraordinary years, she deserves another rousing round. It is a privilege for all of us to be here with the most extraordinary, most accomplished public servant that we have had in this country in a long, long time, Hillary Rodham Clinton. As an attorney from another law school, as civic leader, as an advocate for children, for the poor, and for women, as First Lady, as United States Senator, as our Secretary of State, she has served with exemplary determination and intelligence and resilience and courage. And as we begin our discussion today of a very complex subject, what is America's relationship to the rest of the world? What is America trying to achieve in that world? We will have Secretary Clinton's prodigious record of accomplishment to help guide us. From her first national speech on a stage 10 miles west of here at Wellesley College in 1969, to her path-breaking exhortation in Beijing at a seminal conference in 1995 that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, to her untiring support for the United States military when she was a senator from the state of New York, to her 4 challenging, consequential, and often, I'm sure, exhausting years as our 67th Secretary of State, she has given with every ounce of persistence and hope and determination. She showed us how America can be great on the world stage. And I think she may exemplify better than just about anybody I know Theodore Roosevelt's belief that it's not the critic who counts, that the credit belongs, in this case, to the woman who is in the arena, who's in the public square, who's in the middle of the action. And in Roosevelt's words, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends herself in a worthy cause, so as TR said so memorably, her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. She has been in the arena for all of us, for the United States, for her entire adult life. As Secretary of State, she steered America's response to the Arab revolutions. She stood up to the Chinese in 2010 on the South China Sea. She stood up to a truculent Vladimir Putin in Eastern Europe. She ended, and read her memoirs and you'll get the detail on that. She ended a bitter and bloody rocket war between Israel and Hezbollah, and she managed nuclear arms reductions to make this a safer world. She also, and Anne-Marie will talk about this, I'm sure, today, because Anne-Marie was a big part of it. She pioneered an important conceptual change about how we should think about diplomacy. It was her insight that American diplomacy, American development, and American defense must all be linked in one cohesive national strategy. And in contrast to the absolutely deplorable lack of support for our diplomats over the last year, she inspired our diplomats to represent the United States, our young women, our young men, all around the world. So this panel's meeting at an important moment where America's greatness on the global stage is being challenged as never before. What has made America an exceptional nation, the indispensable nation, as President Clinton and Secretary Albright used to remind us? What has made us the undisputed global nation? A great nation since the Second World War to 9/11 and the years since. We had to be an outward-looking people. We had to understand that we had to be part of the global commons, engage with the rest of the world, not digging a moat around the country and pulling up the drawbridges, but actually being in the world as a leader. Our closest friends and our allies lament the fact that we are very far from that vision now. And it's important to remember a little bit of history. After World War II, every president, until President Trump, every president, Republican and Democrat, believed that our power and purpose was based on enduring foundations. Our alliances like NATO, free trade, a willingness to keep America's doors open to immigration and to refugees, a willingness to lead in the defense of human rights and of democracy and of democratic ideals when they're challenged, as Madeleine has written about in her new book. But the cruel reality is this: we are now retreating in all of those areas. Our government has abandoned the Paris Climate Change Accords, abandoned 3 major trade agreements, abandoned the Iran nuclear deal, abandoned our historic position on Jerusalem, and may now be abandoning the pursuit of diplomacy in North Korea. We're no longer leading in the tradition of Marshall and Atchison, of Dulles and Herter, of James A. Baker, of Madeleine Albright, of Colin Powell, of Condoleezza Rice, and Hillary Rodham Clinton. Winston Churchill visited Harvard and Radcliffe in September 1943, and he addressed the students here at this university. And it was an epical time in a terrible war. It was just after the Allied victories at Stalingrad and El Alamein, just after the commencement of the Italian campaign. The US was taking the metaphorical baton of leadership from Britain as the world's strongest power. And at that critical moment when so much rested on our shoulders, here's what Churchill said to the students of Harvard and Radcliffe. He said, "The price of greatness is responsibility. The price of greatness is responsibility. To be truly great in our time, the United States needs to lead with strategic purpose, with respect for other countries and other peoples, with dignity, with dedication to help advance justice and democracy and peace in the world." And we have strayed so far from that mission under Donald Trump's chaotic, weak, and fearful leadership of our country. But in her life and work, Hillary Clinton has been all about responsibility. We're fortunate to have the example of that responsible leadership today to help guide us and to renew America's greatness as we move forward. It's such an honor to be here, and we have 4 very distinguished panelists, starting at the far end of the table on my left. Anne-Marie Slaughter, former Director of Policy Planning at the State Department for Secretary Clinton, a graduate of Harvard Law School, now president and CEO of the New America Foundation. Meghan O'Sullivan, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush for Iraq and Afghanistan. How's that for a tough challenge? Now the Jean Kirkpatrick Professor of the Practice of International Affairs and my colleague at the Harvard Kennedy School. David Ignatius, Washington Post columnist, foreign policy thought leader, spy novelist. Read The Quantum Spy, his latest, a graduate of Harvard College. And Michèle Flournoy, former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, a graduate of Harvard College, back in a reunion year, now Managing Director of West Executive Advisors. Let's get to our discussion. Thank you. So Anne-Marie will lead with you. We'll have a discussion here for the next hour or so. We're going to range widely. We also have a lot of questions from you. Liz and her staff solicited your questions. I have them here. I'll inject those questions, Liz, at the right moment. I thought it was right to lead with Anne-Marie. In her position as state working for Secretary Clinton, she had to look out over the whole world and think about our broad national strategy. I just suggested, Anne-Marie, that we've fallen from grace, that we don't have strategic purpose, that we're not leading, that we've abandoned allies and trade and immigration and refugees. Agree? Disagree?
Well, when I was a law professor here, that would have been known as a leading question.
Yes.
But let me just begin by saying how honored I am to be here. And I have to say, when I walked in with that trumpet fanfare, I thought I was at the royal wedding. But the hats aren't quite as good. I also am here as an example of a glass ceiling that Secretary Clinton broke. I was the first woman director of policy planning, which is the big think job in the State Department. It was founded when George Marshall asked George Kennan to take it on, which is a legacy none of us have ever lived up to. But Secretary Clinton very deliberately wanted to prove to the world, I hope she did, I'm not going to claim that, but she wanted to prove that a woman could hold that job, and that's why I'm sitting here today. I would go anywhere. So, Nick, to answer your question, we are not leading in the world, but I want to frame my answer in the context of a message the American people have been sending us, and we in this room and this great university and all the great universities I've been part of and Washington are not listening. Ever since the end of the Cold War, the candidate that said, I don't want to continue being the global hegemon and spending our money that way, has won. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush, the hero of ending the Cold War, the most literate foreign policy president we had had in a very long time, lost to this governor from the South who didn't really talk about foreign policy a lot in his election. He said, it's the economy, stupid, and I, as a governor of Arkansas, know what to do for this country. In 2000, his vice president, another Southerner, who was an extraordinary global diplomat. He had led the work with Russia. He had been all over the world. And he ran against another Southern governor who basically said, I don't know that much about the world, but we need a kinder, gentler nation. Guess who won? In 2004, similar pattern. 2008, John McCain ran. I am not of John McCain's party, but I have enormous respect for John McCain. John McCain has stood up for the best of our traditions. He stood up against... I will never forget in the aughts when I was here teaching at the time, when suddenly people were actually talking about torture was okay for our country. You know, it was necessary, and we're hearing that again, and John McCain led that fight. And he had been obviously a participant in great global events of our time. But against Barack Obama, he was the globalist. And there was a senator from Illinois who talked about bringing this country together, who rejected the Iraq War. Guess who won? And I don't think I have to tell you the story of 2016, but it is the most horrific example of somebody saying, I don't want this role in the world, and somebody else saying, we must have this role in the world, and we're not winning. So I just want to say a couple of things about how it is time to stop rejecting that message or trying to instruct those who send it on how they really are misguided. It's time to listen to that message. And in many ways, they're telling us something Secretary Clinton taught me, because one of the things I had the privilege of doing was working with her on her first big development speech. And she said to us, she tasked a group of us to think about what should American development policy be. And she said, it cannot be charity. I need to tell the person in Detroit why I am spending American taxpayers' dollars in Africa and not in Detroit. And I must have an account that makes sense to that person. We need to think about how we can lead in the world and in a different way. And to start, we have to recognize that right now, we are less the global hegemon than the global hypocrite. We are preaching values of democracy and universal values we are not practicing at home. We are preaching prosperity, and our country is falling apart. I live on Amtrak. I know of what I speak. But second, we need to make foreign policy and diplomacy the work of many, many more people than those of us on this panel and in this university and in Washington. LA appointed the first deputy mayor for international affairs. That person, I'm proud to say she's a woman, is former ambassador in the Obama administration, Nina Hedchigian. She's in Los Angeles doing foreign affairs. Chicago has 28 sister city relationships. If you ever walk from O'Hare to the Hilton, which I've done many, many, many times, it's a hall of United Nations. 28 nations' flags hang in that walkway. Cities across the country are playing as important a role in fighting terrorism, in climate change. President Trump pulled out, but the cities of the United States, led by Mayor Bloomberg, stood up, and we are going to meet our commitments through those cities' efforts and the efforts of universities, businesses, nonprofit leaders, faith leaders, all of us. So what I would say, to come back to Nick's questions, just a slight digression, we have to, first of all, listen to Americans who are saying, you know, when we were under mortal threat in the Cold War, fighting the Soviet Union, nuclear weapon to nuclear weapon, and let us hope that day doesn't come fully again. We're back to fighting Russia, but in a different configuration. In those days, we would bear any price, pay any price, and bear any burden. But today, we need to pay more attention to what is happening in the United States. So we need to learn how to lead, because I deeply believe, to paraphrase Secretary Albright, we are an indispensable nation. We are not the only one, but we are a nation that needs to be at the global table, and when we are, the world is a better place. But to get there, we have to listen to Americans, we have to learn how to lead in a different way, and to not only have the great diplomats like Nick Burns, but to have all those people who are not in the Foreign Service, but who are representing America in the world, be a part of who we are and what we do in the world. Thank you.
Meghan, another way to ask this question, I wanted you to speak to this as well, is you are a Republican. There's been a consensus since the late 40s among Republicans and Democrats in foreign and defense policy, the way we haven't had it in domestic policy. It's all those things that Anne-Marie and I have talked about, that Madeline has written in her new book. What's happened to that consensus? And can I just end to your party? And is your party divided on that?
Party too.
Great, thanks for the softball. Good morning, everyone. And like others, I'd like to begin by saying what an honor it is to be here today for such a great day for Radcliffe and for such a wonderful occasion to honor Secretary Clinton. Unlike many others on the stage, I have not had the opportunity to work for Secretary Clinton, but I have benefited from her career as a citizen, most importantly, and all the good that she's done, but also as a woman, because she has fought many fights that I will not have to fight because she did that. So I want to thank you. And I hope that I can answer your question, Nick, and inject a little bit of optimism, simply because there is the risk that we're going to depress ourselves on this topic. To state what others have stated, but I think it is very important to note, is that over the last 70 years, the world has really prospered. This has been a period of kind of unprecedented prosperity and peace, on large account because of the web of institutions and norms that have underpinned a lot of what has gone on in the world. And the US has just been the most critical actor, not only in constructing that web of institutions and norms, but in defending it. And I think any president at this moment would have a challenge with this order, with kind of rejuvenating it, with bringing it up to the moment. The world is very different than it was 70 years ago, and I think any president would have the challenge of modernizing this international order, as we call it, and dealing with new challenges to that order, be it China, be it global disease, whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, we're not having that conversation, which would be much wonkier but much more welcome, and that would be how to reform this international order. We're having a conversation about, are we still invested in it? And as others have suggested, we really, despite Anne-Marie's laying out the electoral map over the last couple of decades, we have the first president in office who has questioned openly whether it is in America's interest to continue to be the defender of this particular role in the world. So others maybe didn't campaign on it, but once that person came into the Oval Office, the imperative of American leadership, I think, has always been clear. So we are at a unique moment with a president who does question whether this is good for America. And this is concerning because it takes leadership, particularly in a moment where there are lots of anxieties about globalization. It takes leadership, not only from the Oval Office, but I would say most importantly from the Oval Office, to build and maintain a consensus within our own country about the importance of America playing this role, and to make sure that consensus is not based just on people on this stage or people in this tent, but that it is one that embraces elites and non-elites. It embraces, as Anne-Marie has said, all parts of our country. To get to your question specifically about the Republican Party, and here's where I'm injecting optimism, I would say it is still important to distinguish between the president and the Republican Party. Many Republicans, and I would consider myself one of them, don't really see him as a Republican. And he has departed from very traditional core Republican values and policies in very, very fundamental ways. Now, I think this is a little disguised by the tax cuts, because you have seen the Republican leadership and really rally behind the president in this regard. But if we look at the menu of policies and attitudes and orientations, I still think there is a pretty significant gap between the president and the bulk of the party when it comes to international affairs. I could go through the long list, but in the interest of time, I won't. I'll simply say, take trade, for instance. The president's been very vocal about trade. This is one of the things that has been very consistent, one of the few things that has been very consistent in his policy agenda, and he is not someone who extols the value of free trade. He openly embraced protectionism in his, in his inaugural speech. But I think there's still a very strong support for free trade among Republicans, among American business. And I would say, if you look at polls, most Americans still are more in favor of free trade than they are against it. And so I think there is still a lot to work with. And that's true for alliances as well. Americans like alliances, Democrat, Republican. And just because the president doesn't seem to value them as much as many of us would like, doesn't mean that we no longer have a national, foundation for these things. So again, I won't go through the whole list of areas in which I think we still have a strong foundation and a strong national interest, but I do think we are at a moment of a crisis of leadership, and which is why it's such a wonderful day to honor some national leadership in this tent.
Meghan, thank you. Just to support something that Meghan said about Republican leadership in Congress, it was Ed Royce, Bob Corker, Lindsey Graham who stood up to President Trump on funding for the State Department, for instance, over the last year. Republicans restored the funding. So I think there is this dynamic on the Hill. A lot of questions here from the audience, Michèle, about our challenges with Vladimir Putin. And you've been a leading defense official for our country for a long time. He invaded Georgia in 2008. He invaded, occupied, and annexed Crimea in 2014. 8,000 Russian troops in eastern Ukraine, pressuring the Baltic states. Are we back to containment? We're rebuilding American armored presence in Eastern Europe. And what would you advise President Trump to do about Putin, Eastern Europe, the defense of democracy?
Well, let me just say it's a pleasure to be back at Radcliffe, where I have many fond memories. I was saying particularly rowing under Radcliffe colors on the Charles River. And such an honor to be a part of a panel honoring Secretary Clinton. I had the great good fortune of being trapped in a windowless room with her for many, many hours, the Situation Room, and just such a privilege to watch such an extraordinary public servant guide U.S. foreign policy to be smart and strategic and in the best interests of America and Americans. So thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me to be part of this. So Vladimir Putin and Russia. I think it's important to understand where Putin is coming from. Putin represents a deep sense of grievance in Russia, that Russia, since the end of the Cold War, has lost its geopolitical position, has presided over a declining economy, has had a failed experiment in democracy, has really become a middling power as opposed to a great power. And so Putin is determined to reassert Russia as a great power, using just about any means necessary. He is determined to recreate a sphere of influence around Russia's borders. And most importantly for us, he is also determined to undermine democracy as a model, be it in Central and Eastern Europe or here in the United States, because the biggest threat to Vladimir Putin is the potential for true democracy to reemerge in Russia. Despite the relative economic weakness of Russia compared to its European counterparts, Putin has actually played a limited hand very well. He has reverted to the KGB playbook and used a whole range of asymmetric means to try to advance Russian interests and influence. Intelligence operations, propaganda, disinformation, cyber attacks, little green men, meaning paid Russian proxies, and so forth. And we've seen this in Crimea, in Ukraine, previously in Georgia. We've seen it in the meddling that preceded the meddling in our elections, the meddling in Eastern and Central European elections, and so forth. So I think to answer your question, I think unfortunately, despite some very serious work at resetting the relationship by investing in areas where we had common interests like arms control, non-proliferation, counterterrorism, climate change, and so many others, Putin has really taken a very sharp turn. And now Russia is presenting real challenges to the United States, if not in some cases an actual threat. So what do? I think the most important step we need to take is to reestablish a very clear policy of deterrence. We need to clarify where the lines are with Putin with regard to us and with regard to our European allies. First and foremost, we have to deter meddling in the next round of elections, being in this fall in 2018, where there's already evidence of preparation of that, and certainly in 2020. One of the challenges of President Trump's denial of this issue is for his own personal reasons and his own concerns about the legitimacy of his election, is that the United States does not have a strategy for preventing this from happening. Again, this is the biggest threat to our democracy that exists. We cannot go through an election where Russian meddling actually calls into question the results of the vote tallies. Although they didn't do that last time, we know that they surveyed at least 32, 35 of our state electoral systems to know how to do it if they needed to. We need to prevent that. It means investing in the resilience of our electoral systems at the state and local level. Fortunately, Congress has finally allocated some funds for that, but we need to really engage the best of the private sector to help state and local electoral officials improve the strength of their system. But we also need to clearly communicate to Putin that there will be no kidding costs if he crosses that line again. We also need to clarify deterrence in Europe. It is completely unfathomable and unacceptable that a United States president would go to his first NATO summit and refuse to re-articulate America's security commitment to NATO. This is the alliance that invoked Article 5 for the first time in our history because we were under attack on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda. How is it possible that an American president would hesitate to make a commitment to the most important set of allies we have in the world and a huge source of strategic advantage for the United States? So we need to clarify in word and in deed that we are there to support deterrence and reassurance in Europe. We also need to make sure that we continue to support democracy programs and resilience programs. There's a real threat to democracy in Central and Eastern Europe. We need to do better at countering Russian propaganda and information operations in Europe and here. And lastly, we need to invest to ensure that we maintain the military edge that we will need in certain critical areas like cyber and electronic warfare and precision strike to, again, underwrite deterrence and make sure that Vladimir Putin does not miscalculate and think that he can cross a border into Europe or cross a border and threaten us militarily. So let me stop there.
Michèle, a quick follow-up before we... Before we talk about the Middle East and North Korea, two perilous subjects. Last week, really one of the only bipartisan committees these days in Congress, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, led by a Republican, Richard Burr of North Carolina, and a Democrat, the Vice Chair, Mark Warner of Virginia, issued a report after more than a year of study and hearing, saying they had no doubt the Russians interfered in the elections, no doubt they interfered on behalf of candidate Trump. Are we ready for 2018? You talked about that. Are we ready for 2020? Is it up to the attorney generals of our states to try to fashion these defense policies? Are we going to get leadership from Washington?
We are not ready. Particularly for 2018, I think that there'll be some candidates who take the steps necessary to make sure their own cybersecurity is up to speed. But my biggest worry is, again, our electoral infrastructure is operated at the state and local level. It is as diverse and differentiated as you could possibly imagine. There's been no leadership on the part of the federal government. Until now, there's been very little money available to help. I've been part of an effort to mobilize the tech community on a pro bono basis to go out and offer advice, services, counsel, help to any candidate, any state election official, any local election official who wants to build the resilience of their system, the most important thing we need to do is to have an audit trail, no matter what happens, whether we go back to a paper audit trail or an encrypted electronic audit trail. But we must ensure that when we have an election in 2020, we actually know with confidence who won. And we need to also communicate to Vladimir Putin that we will be coming after the things that he and his oligarchs care about most if he crosses that line again.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to take on the Middle East. At Harvard, we have courses where we do this over 3.5 months. We're going to do this and ask Meghan and David, who both know a lot after decades of experience in the Middle East. And here's the question I'd pose to both of you. I think, Meghan, you're going to take the lead, and David will speak second. We've just come out of a very bloody war in Iraq. We're back in the fight against the Islamic State, which is ending. We're in Syria. Iran's a regional troublemaker. We're out of the Iran nuclear deal. The question is there an overarching strategy that our government should have to deal with this, because we've been the most important outside power since the 1970s in the Middle East? I keep asking you the most challenging questions, but I know you can answer them.
Well, there's plenty to go around, I think. Let me say it's interesting, your question is interesting because it implies really two things. You know, one, does the U.S. still have an interest in being in the Middle East in the way that it has been for the previous decades? And two, are we capable of devising a strategy that meets the enormous challenges of that part of the world? So let me take them both quickly in turn. First, this question of, is it really in the U.S. interest for us to be there? And I get this question a lot. I'm sure many of you do. And I understand that people are hoping you'll say, no, it's no longer in our interest to be there. One, there's the fatigue that has gone on as a result of the engagements in Iraq and elsewhere. But also there's this new idea that we're more self-sufficient in energy, and therefore we don't need to be in the Middle East because we don't need their energy, and that is a big change in the relationship. And you know, I hate to throw cold water on these ideas, but in fact, it still is very much in the U.S. interest to be engaged in the Middle East and to be invested in a better outcome for that part of the world. There are energy reasons why that still is true, regardless of how much oil the U.S. produces, which I could go into, but I'll save that for another time. But there's also a broad range of non-energy interests that are going to keep us there. And there's also a need to throw cold water on a related idea, and that is maybe the Middle East would be better off without American engagement. You know, we certainly have demonstrated that we are capable of making many serious mistakes in that part of the world, and wouldn't that region be better without the United States? I can say pretty definitively, when we look at Syria today, despite the great advice of Secretary Clinton and others, that is what the Middle East looks like without a lot of U.S. engagement. It is not obviously a better place, either from the perspective of people living in the Middle East or for U.S. interest. You think about how destabilizing that conflict has been to our European allies, the risks that it has posed to the United States. So I very squarely put myself in the camp of people who believe it is still very much in America's interest, regardless of how difficult it is to stay engaged in that part of the world. The question about strategy is harder. And I know David will go into this in even greater detail. But let me just say, of course, this is a very, very heterogeneous part of the world, despite maybe some of the stereotypes. It's a very varied part of the world. So we're not going to have one strategy that actually addresses all of the challenges in that part of the world. But we do need two things, which are currently in very short supply, if we are going to be better positioned to respond to the challenges in that part of the world and to meet them. And those two things are, first, I would say, is a much greater appreciation for how interconnected the challenges are there. So they're not the same, but they're very related. So take, for example, the decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. Now, this decision, whatever you think of it, it makes are challenges in other parts of the region, not just in Iran, but in other parts of the region, much, much harder. Because Iran is all over the region. So if we give a reason for Iran to oppose American interests, not just on this narrow but very significant question of Iran's nuclear ambitions, this gives Iran incentive to challenge us more in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. Really, this creates more obstacles to success. So again, we need a greater appreciation for how these things are all interrelated, and that the assessments that happen in this windowless room really need to reflect that. And secondly, in a category of potentially unpopular things I will say today, I think Americans need to get over, and I know this is impossible, which is why I'm not a politician, their aversion to, call it whatever we want, but helping other countries build institutions. What has happened in the Middle East in the last 10 years is really the collapse of the Arab state. And to the extent that there is such a thing as a solution for that part of the world, it will be the rebuilding of states in the Arab world. Now, this is not to say America should be rebuilding these states, but America has a real interest in these states are rebuilt in a way that reflects the interests both of their people and of stability in the region. And America has know-how and resources and diplomatic heft that's very important in the rebuilding of these countries. So again, the aversion to getting involved in things that are difficult, that require resources, and that take a long time, we will have to tackle that head on if we are going to be able to help a very critical part of the world have a better future, which is essential to our own future as well.
Thank you, Meghan. Meghan has written a great new book called Windfall, which looks at transformations in the energy industry worldwide, which we highly recommend.
I was going to complain that you gave David's spy novel a
I'm
plug.
just trying to be fair and balanced. Fair and balanced. David, it's so great to have you here. I think all of us recognize your deep experience in the Middle East. You were a foreign correspondent there several decades ago. You go back. You've been in Syria. You've been tracking this unbelievable human tragedy of the 12 million homeless, the fractured state. How do you make sense of this? I mean, if you were to advise President Trump, what should he be doing?
Thank you, Nick. And the first thing to say is that Syria, but so much of the Middle East, it's a tragedy. We watch it. We feel a sense of horror for what's happened to people. We struggle to think of how we can affect that, reduce the human cost, and we have failed again and again, and it's painful and poignant, so that's the first starting point. In covering Secretary Clinton when she was Secretary of State and her Middle East views, I was struck by two things that I want to mention. First, I think she was always ready to use American power to try to maintain the conditions of security and stability that region needs. She understood that however tired the United States might be of its involvement there, the consequence of our withdrawal would be only greater loss of life, and that's what we've seen. She also, as I remember, was cautious about what she wanted us to do. When the Arab Spring swept the Arab world, moved from Tunisia into Egypt, Secretary Clinton was, within the Obama administration, a voice for, let's be careful. Let's see if we can get an orderly transition in Egypt away from Hosni Mubarak, then the president. Maybe let's take yes for an answer when he said on February 1, 2011 that he was prepared to resign. As I read that record, I think Secretary Clinton and her caution, let's not go over the waterfall here. Let's not throw this up for revolution. I think it looks very sensible. A second thing that sticks in my mind is Secretary Clinton's views about Syria as this great tragedy began to roll forward, as this country began to come apart. In 2012, as a columnist, I was struggling to figure out, what do I think about this? What's the right thing to recommend? I honestly didn't know. So I did what journalists do. I decided to do the reporting, and I snuck across the Turkish border, smuggled by the Free Syrian Army, as it was called, and traveled to Aleppo. It was the craziest thing I've ever done as a journalist. My wife still hasn't really forgiven me for it. But when I got out, it was obvious to me that the policies, it was not then known that Secretary Clinton was advocating them in secret in the Situation Room, but that those policies were correct. What I wrote and what she was arguing inside was, first, Bashar al-Assad will never govern all of Syria again. It's not going to happen. He's gone to war with his own people. Second, the Free Syrian Army, these people trying to create a new country, need help. They're a mess, and they need the kind of help that the U.S. military special forces can provide. And three, if we don't do that, the extremists who I already saw all over Aleppo and northern Syria will only get stronger. And of course, that was before there was anything called ISIS, and ISIS came, and we were then plunged into a much darker war. But I think Secretary Clinton got that right. She argued it in the administration. I will believe till my last breath that this awful story might have been different if her advice had been followed. Let me conclude just by offering a brief snapshot of where we are now in a part of this policy. Syria as a whole is in catastrophic state failure, but in the east of Syria, east of the Euphrates, where our special forces have delivered almost completely on their commitment to destroy ISIS, you do see conditions of stability. The United States found a way to deploy military power with very few people. It's basically been 2,000 special forces in Syria, motivated allies who want to do the fighting themselves, a small footprint, and extraordinary success. East of the Euphrates, I've traveled there 3 times in the last 2 years. You see people fleeing toward America and its allies for security. I'll close with just a deeply disturbing image of what we have done, probably without an alternative, but we don't want to do again. Traveling through Raqqa, which was the capital of the Islamic State, you see, I was there 2 months ago, you see a level of destruction I have never seen covering wars, conflicts for more than 30 years. It looks like the pictures we remember of the Battle of Berlin at the end of World War II. It's a nightmare. It tells you 2 things. If you really mess with the United States to the point that we say, we're going to make a commitment to degrade and destroy your movement, we mean it. And we have the ability to bring to bear a level of military power that people just have to take seriously. And second, we don't want to do that again. And what I've come to think is, once a determined adversary is in an urban area like Raqqa, like these cities, there really is no good, humane way to get them out. So we have to, with our allies, prevent that from happening in the first place. But I think on these questions, Secretary Clinton came as close to getting it right as anybody I know at the top of government.
Nick, if you'll just allow me to make a very quick 2-finger about this. I think your point about Raqqa and the devastation, not only in Syria, but also in northern Iraq, is just incredible. And your point saying that America has made the point to the world, if we say we're going to destroy your movement, this is what happens. I think an even stronger point would be to be able to point to those parts of the world and say, but we can help you rebuild. Because that is where I think the future of this conflict in Syria and in Iraq is going to go. If those places are not rebuilt in some fashion, then we're going to see this movie again. Again, that doesn't mean America going in and doing all of the rebuilding, but marshaling a lot of the diplomatic effort, the economic resources, I think is going to be absolutely critical.
Anne-Marie.
Just quickly on again, to tie this back to domestic politics. And again, my thesis is it is so important to have these conversations, but if we're not thinking about domestic politics, we will continue having these conversations where we are lamenting what is happening, and we're not connected to the American people. So just on Meghan's point about state building, and it goes to David's point equally about the kind of destruction, and what Secretary Clinton, I think, saw was that we must focus on the people as well as the chessboard of politics. But to Meghan's point about who wants us out of state building, who wants us out of the Middle East, it's not just the people you might expect. It is, at least in my organization, which is 46% under 30 and extremely diverse, it is the young people of color who in part inherit a sort of post-colonial view that America in these places has done nothing but bad, but who also, they look at the Middle East and they see an analogy between American power oppressing people there and American power oppressing people here. And so to really build the kind of consensus we want, and I totally agree with you, we have to change the way we talk about it and think about it. We need to explain why actually, in the first place, we are just enabling the people of the region to rebuild their own countries. We are not rebuilding anything, and you said this, but we have to do it in a way that brings a very, very different group of Americans along.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We could go on for days, months, years on the Middle East. I want to ask a question on North Korea.
Yes.
Then we're going to leave you with some hope. I'm going to ask the panel, what are you strategically hopeful about? Because we don't want to depress this entire audience. David, until yesterday morning at 10 a.m., and I've been an opponent of Donald Trump, I thought, you know, he's done okay on North Korea. He turned away from war towards diplomacy. The big summit, June 12th, coins minted. But seriously, he was going to meet him. Mike Pompeo twice to Pyongyang, first ever meetings of an American diplomat with Kim Jong-un. First ever meetings. I thought, good for Donald Trump. We should support him in this. Then it was this letter, the most unique breakup letter of all time, diplomatic breakup letter. And are we in? Are we out? Is this just part of the diplomacy? Is this a tactical move? Are we going back to the use of force? Where are we?
The
North
extraordinary
Korea?
truth is we don't know. Covering foreign policy these last 18 months, whatever it is, I sometimes liken to vertigo. You just literally, it's like falling through space, something I never remember feeling covering Secretary Clinton. The breakup letter was a classic. I mean, a classic of sort of passive-aggressive, wounded, you know, you said such hurtful things about me, you know, I just can't see you anymore, but maybe we could get together again. Just try reading it as a letter, like letters that people send. I think, as I stand back and look at this, the message that I take is that it probably isn't a bad thing that this summit is postponed. I hope it's not gone forever and that we're not back to fire and fury. But I think we were heading toward a summit that, in a sense, was burdened by over-expectation. The president wanted a favorable outcome too much, but had planned for it too little. The two sides couldn't really begin to write the communique because on the question of denuclearization, they had fundamentally different definitions of what that meant. And so, you know, I think it's not a terrible thing that people take a little more time. I know with great interest that after this amazing, coy, flattering, threatening letter from Donald Trump, that the North Koreans responded this morning, their time, with a very measured, high-road statement praising Donald Trump, talking about the Trump process. It's been incredibly important to work with him. I mean, you know, they've really got the counter messaging down. So who can say where this is going, but I think a little more time is appropriate. I hope the lesson for this president is that while there are values to the disruptive style that he adopts, you know, kind of suddenly rearranging chairs, does create space sometimes, and we need to be honest, we can see some of that with North Korea, but the disruptive approach carried to this extreme where literally you don't know from one news cycle to the next which way we're going. Are we for the Libya model? Are we against it? Are we for it again? It literally has been like that over the last week. That in the end, that's counterproductive. One thing, again, I'll come back to Secretary Clinton. I watched with great interest the way she sometimes used secret diplomacy, in particular in setting sail on our initiative with Iran that led to the Iran nuclear agreement. But she sent her most private emissaries to Oman to begin meetings. Nobody knew about it. As a journalist, I'm supposed to say that's a terrible thing. And I always want more information than less. But I do think Secretary Clinton understood that sometimes doing it carefully, doing it quietly, not disruptively, is the way to get the results that the country wants. So I hope we're back on that track with North Korea. I must say I'm impressed by Secretary Pompeo's management of the quiet side of this. He obviously has the president's confidence. If you were going to make a positive bet, you'd say that Pompeo will think strategically and will end up with a little more time back in this conversation.
And that's a relatively hopeful thing to say. Michèle, do you share that? And when the president turned towards diplomacy, I think a lot of us breathed a sigh of relief because the military options, you're Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Someday you may be Secretary of Defense, just to put you on the spot. I mean, Arthur, do we have any
We can only hope.
We all hope this. We all hope this. Are there any good military options? If we had to go there, and none of us want to go there.
Yeah. Short answer is no. But I'll expand. So I agree that I think this opportunity, which was an important opportunity for diplomacy, fell apart because the administration was not serious in its preparation, really taking the time to bring in experts to understand what do we think Kim Jong-un is really trying to achieve here? What do we think we're trying to achieve? What are our objectives? What are we willing to give? What are they willing to give? What are we willing to hold in reserve? How do you sequence these things? The lack of serious diplomatic preparation that has been needed historically in every single time where we've had a breakthrough and success, it just wasn't done. So I hope that Mike Pompeo now has the assignment to get that going, but he will have a challenge. We don't have an ambassador. We don't have the right State Department jobs filled to give him much help, and you certainly can't expect this kind of leadership to come from John Bolton. So I hope that, I think the best case is that they focus on some serious planning and preparation. They exert some message discipline so they don't have random officials saying random things that the North Koreans have to react to, and that they get back on a more serious attempt at diplomacy. And this brings me to the answer to the question, because the alternative is that if diplomacy truly fails, this administration has talked about using the military option. And I want to just be very clear about what that would look like. The first thing is, we know that North Korea has dozens of nuclear weapons. We know they are distributed at hidden and underground facilities. We know they have hundreds and hundreds of missiles that can hit regional allies or now intercontinental hit United States. Those are also hidden. Many are mobile. There is no military strike that can denuclearize North Korea as a military operation. You may get some of it. You won't get all of it. The second thing, Kim Jong-un's not going to sit there and take a large military strike when it would have to be large to try to get most of this. He is going to respond. How is he likely to respond? He has tens of thousands of short-range rockets and artillery shells that can be fired in seconds on their way to Seoul. the city with a population of 25 million civilians, including a lot of Americans. Any kind of military strike would almost certainly quickly escalate into an actual conflict. If we actually saw war in Korea, this is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. Part of my job was, as undersecretary, was helping the secretary provide civilian oversight of war planning. We went through the Korea plans dozens of times. This is a very intensive, bloody, long war that the American people are not prepared for, and we should never undertake without exhausting every possibility, including diplomacy, containment, and all of the tools that have worked for us throughout the Cold War. Lastly, there's a real risk of nuclear use. Kim Jong-un has these weapons as his survival card. If we truly are in a position to threaten his regime, I can't imagine a situation where he wouldn't try to use these. And then we are in the world of a nuclear conflict. So we all have to hope and pray that we get back on the diplomatic track, and that this time the administration learns some lessons from its recent experience and gets much more serious about pursuing it.
Thank you, Michèle. So after Putin, the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Kim Jong-un, we need a little uplifting. So, Liz, we have 11 minutes left. And I want to do 2 lightning rounds where I pose 2 questions, brief answers from the 4 panelists. The first one is, are we living in the age of pessimism? Social media, you know, the dueling cable TV channels, all the pessimism about America. I'd frame it this way. My wife Libby is here. A couple of years ago, she came to one of my talks here. She made the huge mistake of doing that. And it was about all of these problems. And on the way home here in Cambridge, I said, how'd that go? And there was a pause. And she said, you're depressing everybody. And she said, what are you hopeful about? Where are the big trend lines? And that was a really good observation and question. So this semester, I asked my class of 75 students from 22 countries, don't tell me what you wish for, but analytically, where are the big positive global trends, economic, technological, political, that we can all try to push forward on as a human community? So maybe I'll just go in reverse order, Emery, and start with you. What are you hopeful about?
I'm hugely hopeful because we're living in an age of renewal. So 2 things. One, everyone here who has anybody in their life who is graduating, go buy a book called Our Towns, A 100,000-Mile Journey into the Heart of America by Jim and Deb Fallows. And I want to emphasize, it's Radcliffe Day. Jim Fallows, we know him, he's great, he's a Harvard grad. And Deb Fallows, his wife, who's a linguistics PhD from Harvard. They spent 5 years flying around this country, going to large towns, small cities, Columbus, Ohio, to Sioux Falls, to Eastport, Maine, across this country. And they tell you what I have also seen, that at the national level, I've never been as depressed. But as at the local level, at the level where people know each other and know that we're broken and know that we have to fix it, as they say and they document, people are coming together and working together and solving problems who would never work together at the national level. So go and think about it, go buy it. And then here's the larger part. Renewal is the American way. If you just look back to the end of the 19th century, go back and read your Upton Sinclair. Go back and look at the Gini coefficient for the late 19th century, the inequality, the unbelievable inequality for the historians present. It was machine politics, it was close to violence, and who renewed us? It was the folks from the heartland out. It was the progressives and the populists and people from across the country, Republicans and Democrats, or more importantly, right and left, who said, we are America, we have these values, we fall short, so far short, but when we do, we remind ourselves of who we are and what we stand for, and we pick ourselves back up and we renew this country, and it is happening now.
Hi. Like Anne-Marie, I refuse to live in an age of pessimism. So just quickly, two things. One, obvious this week, anyone who's here in Cambridge is just watching our students graduate. You cannot help but be optimistic. Yesterday, with Nick, we lined the corridor where our graduates marched in before the ceremony, and no matter how many times I do it, I will never fail to be moved by their faces, by the enthusiasm that they all have for going out and making the world a different place. So if you're ever feeling down, just pop on a video of that. Second, more in the policy side, I would say I'm optimistic about the age of energy abundance. So if we were meeting 10 years ago, we could have got into a conversation about potential nodes of conflict, and we might have focused on energy scarcity as being one of those nodes, because 10 years ago, the global energy landscape looked completely different from what it looks like today. Today, we really are living in a world where people are worried about energy rightly from a perspective of climate change and other potential environmental issues, but much less worried about energy from the perspective of being a source of conflict. So I have a former colleague who in 2006 said he could not imagine any future scenario that did not involve conflict between the United States and China over energy. Nobody will make that statement today because China and the US are not competing for energy. In fact, China is exporting energy the US is exporting energy to China, pretty remarkable. And there are a number of other examples I could give you how this new energy landscape actually provides some opportunities for more peaceful engagement, be it from undermining one of Russia's real potent foreign policy tools to actually potentially creating reasons for new relationships, such as between Israelis and their Arab neighbors, because Israel has huge new natural gas finds, a resource that its neighbors really need and want. So that's one good reason to be optimistic. Two good reasons.
Thank you. Very good. David.
I'll also offer two quick reasons. I'm optimistic because we still live in a country where citizens get to decide what kind of government they want. I'm not happy about the choices that people sometimes make, and I want people to fight to preserve their ability to choose despite outside interference and to prize that citizenship. But we still are special in that respect. Second, and this sounds so corny, but I'm optimistic every time I walk into the newsroom of the Washington Post and any other major news organization. We sometimes in my business you wonder, what's the point of it all? Do we really make a difference? I don't think anybody in the Washington Post, the New York Times, any of these organizations thinks that today. We know we make a difference, and we're really trying hard to tell the truth.
You're here.
I, too, refuse to be too pessimistic. So a couple things give me hope, even though they've come out of very tragic, upsetting circumstances. The one, first, is the mobilization of women in this country in the Me Too movement. And the example to finally end behavior that should have been seen as completely unacceptable decades ago, and to hold people accountable and to change norms and behaviors and expectations. It just gives me great hope, and it's actually inspiring. I'm on the board of CARE, an NGO, and it's actually inspiring now a global Me Too movement, which is just incredible for women around the world. Second is young people. Look at how the students of Parkland and all over this country have stood up and said, this has to stop. This gun violence has to stop, and we're not going to stop until it changes. And lastly, look at how many women and how many young people are like first responders running toward the flames. They are going to go run for office and change the system.
So my 75 students said, poverty alleviation, the greatest in the history of the world, last 30 years. Global health, the eradication of polio in 2 to 3 years, malaria in 20 to 25. They hope for technology too. They see the double edge on AI, on quantum computing, on gene editing, but they see that it's a hopeful tool. And lastly, and this was really high on the class poll, leadership opportunities for women. Yeah. 75 students from 22 countries. So, Liz, can we do a lightning round of 30 seconds each? Because the last question, Madam Secretary, is about you. And it's about you. You don't have to say anything now. To all of you, in 30 seconds, what do you most admire about Secretary Clinton? Yes, Anne-Marie.
I've got books on that subject. What I admire about Secretary Clinton is that she has an extraordinarily expansive vision of how America should be in the world. I thought, I'll make a confession, that I was going to teach her more than she taught me. I'd been doing foreign policy for 30 years, and she was relatively new to it. She taught me to think about a world not only in terms of states and diplomacy and coercion and defense, all the things you've heard, but also a world in which we equally focus on the people and on poverty and education and health and resource security and food security and anti-corruption. What makes a difference to people, how they live every day? Our security in this world and our morality in this world lies in that just as much as classic diplomacy. Secretary Clinton taught me that, and it is a lesson that will guide the rest of my life.
Okay, 2 points in 30 seconds. So first is an idea and one is a policy. What I admire most is the big idea behind, I think, everything that we've seen Secretary Clinton do, especially on the world stage, and that is that the objective of U.S. foreign policy is to make the world a better place. Reading back over speeches she's made, in 2013, she said to the Council on Foreign Relations, we, the United States, are the force for progress, prosperity, and peace. Kind of unabashedly embracing that role of the U.S. and the responsibility that comes with that. So I admire that, and I admire that today more than ever. And on policy, I would say one country that surprisingly we didn't talk about is China. And this is I would say, the most important bilateral relationship that the U.S. has, maybe the most, or certainly the most important bilateral relationship in the world, and obviously very, very complex. And I feel like Secretary Clinton, she really understood the importance of that and the challenge that China posed, both in terms of its power and its ambitions. But I also felt like her approach towards China recognized that it is essential we find an accommodation is the wrong word, I guess, essential that we find a way to work with China, and that it is possible for us to do this. We have sufficient common interest that we can find a way. And that, I think, is so critical to the U.S. success in the world and really to global success going forward. And that is something which is easier said than actually implemented, and I give her a lot of credit for advancing those ideas.
I'm a journalist, so I don't want to give too gee whiz an answer here. So I'll just say two things. In covering Secretary Clinton for a long time, I think she consistently gets the big things right. And that matters. She's strategic. And the second thing is that she's tough. Yes. There is a reason why Vladimir Putin was so determined that she not be our president.
I have a long list, so I'm going to try to be quick. Number one, Hillary Clinton is an amazing role model, not only for women, but for any American who wants to serve their country. Her leadership, her toughness, her resilience, this woman cannot be stopped from serving her country. Second, her strategic focus, as you said, whether it was having the foresight to realize that the most consequential region for the United States of America in terms of our prosperity and our security long-term was going to be Asia, and we needed to start moving more of our strategic bandwidth towards Asia. Whether it was the insight that of the power of empowering women for every dimension of foreign policy and development for us and for around the world. And the last thing I'll say is I've never seen anyone more fully understand how to integrate the different instruments of American power, the military, sanctions, economics, trade, in service of diplomacy to achieve strategic ends. It was like a master class in the use of American power and influence, and we all had a great deal to learn from her. So thank you for your example and your service.
And Madam Secretary, I admire your faith in diplomacy. We need that leadership. I admire your courage in Teddy Roosevelt's arena. And I admire your resilience and faith in our country. Thank you for everything you've done for us.
And I want to add my thanks to Nick and the panelists for a truly fascinating conversation.